Wimbledon 2656.
We want £1 million.
Nobody at the yard had any experience. No senior officer had any experience of kidnapping. Perhaps that's why they probably didn't believe it, because there'd never been such a thing.
Your wife?
Yes.
Do cooperate. For heaven's sake, for her sake, don't call the police.
She was a lovely woman. She was always a friendly, charming, good-looking, nice lady.
Remember, any error will be fatal.
In 1969, a new crime came to Britain: kidnapping. This is the story of the desperate hunt to rescue a kidnapped woman, snatched by mistake because of a Rolls-Royce, and the lure of £1 million. Late in 1969, the Rolls-Royce owned by the Australian-born press magnate Rupert Murdoch left the heart of London's newspaper district and headed south towards Wimbledon. Unknown to its occupant, the car was being followed. This was the beginning of a case that made headlines around the world and propelled the family who lived at this house into tragedy. The 29th of December, 1969. The morning began normally at 20 Arthur Road, Wimbledon. Rupert Murdoch's car left to drive to Fleet Street. The rest of the day passed quietly at the house until late afternoon. The kidnappers thought they had snatched Anna Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch's 26-year-old wife. But they had the wrong woman. The woman they had taken was Muriel McKay, the 55-year-old wife of Murdoch's deputy chairman and fellow Australian, Alec McKay. Murdoch had lent his Rolls-Royce to McKay while he was away for Christmas, and so it was to the McKay's house that the kidnappers had followed the car. The interior of 20 Arthur Road today. Its layout has changed little since that December evening in 1969 when Alec McKay came home to find his wife had vanished. Detective Sergeant Graham Birch was the first CID officer on the scene. He arrived at about 9 p.m.
When I arrived, Mr. McKay let me in and said, "My wife's gone." That's all he said at that stage. Now I immediately saw on the stairs a handbag at the bottom and some ladies' items scattered up the stairs, and that struck me almost immediately like a setup for Agatha Christie play. I also noticed that the phone was on its back and some sticking tape on the table. We went upstairs and we noticed, or Mr. McKay pointed out, that the jewel box had been disturbed. we sat down and talked, and shortly after that, Mr. Lamb, the editor of The Sun, arrived with his photographer, so presumably Mr. McKay telephoned him. I don't know that for sure.
Larry Lamb and Alec McKay were colleagues and friends. The paper edited by Lamb, The Sun, had just been bought by McKay's boss, Rupert Murdoch.
Mr. Lamb was on the telephone then to his office at the Sun newspaper. My judgment was that it looked like a setup, that the stuff was strewn on the stairs. Mr. McKay was so calm, really calm, and it struck me as a setup, and that is what I told my colleague.
As the police debated whether it was all some kind of newspaper stunt, family and friends began to gather that night at the house.
Nobody was quite sure at that stage what had happened. I mean, some people thought that she'd just walked out, or perhaps had a brainstorm or something. And I remember driving round London myself, sort of, or that part of London, vaguely looking for her. I thought I might see her if she'd wandered off and lost her memory or something, because we didn't know at that stage what had happened.
By now, senior detectives had been alerted. Wimbledon CID Chief, Inspector John Miners, arrived at the house after midnight with his boss, the divisional head of the CID, Chief Superintendent Bill Smith. Their first job was to question the family, starting with Alec McKay.
There might have been something nefarious going on at the house. We didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about Mr. McKay at all. I'd never even heard of him before. But having met him and then chatted with him for a while, he was always a very genuine man and gentleman. You can assess people very easily when you've talked to him a little while, and seeing his distress, you can't put on distress like that.
Alec McKay, ever the newspaper man, thought publicity would help to get his wife back. With Larry Lamb's assistance, the news media were alerted. At 1 a.m., the family heard a radio bulletin say that a newspaper executive's wife was missing. The family were not the only ones keeping a late night. The phone was answered by Alec McKay's son-in-law, David Dyer. In another room, Detective Sergeant Walter White was listening in on an extension as the caller asked to speak to Alec McKay.
This is a note of the conversation that I made at the time. The caller verified, first of all, that he was talking to Mr. McKay, and then said, "This is Mafia Group 3. We are from America, Mafia M3. We have your wife." Mr. McKay said, "You have my wife." The caller replied, "You will need £1 million by Wednesday." Mr. McKay said, "This is ridiculous. I haven't got £1 million. I haven't got anything like it. I don't know anyone who has." The caller said, "You had better get it."
Someone else was listening to the chilling telephone call. In the Epping telephone exchange, the night operator had connected the call for a man who was having trouble getting through from a coin box.
First of all, I thought it was his friend, playing about, like a lot of friends do. You know, they're just being silly.
The caller said, "I haven't much time, don't waste it. We tried to get Rupert Murdoch's wife. We couldn't get her, so we took yours instead. You have £1 million by Wednesday night, or we will kill her."
Jokes don't go on that long. And that's when I realised that there was an evil person on the other end, and he did sound evil. He really did sound evil.
The caller said, "Have the money, or you won't have a wife."
Terry Underhill was so unnerved by what he heard that he didn't think of ringing the police while the call was taking place.
Why on earth didn't I ring that number? Why on earth, when he was on the phone, Why didn't I get the police round there while he was still talking on the phone? Could have it saved a life?
When M3 rang off, Terry Underhill regained his presence of mind. He stayed on the line and told Sergeant White that the call had come from a kiosk in Epping Forest. But by then, the caller had vanished. Next day, the police installed a tape recorder at the Mackay's house. Just before 5 p.m, M3 rang again. David Dyer took the call once more. This is the actual recording.
Hello?
This is M3 speaking again.
Yes.
Your wife just posted a letter to you.
Yes.
Do cooperate.
I see.
For heaven's sake, for her sake, don't call the police. Did you got the money?
Just a minute.
The caller hung up abruptly, leaving everyone puzzled. Kidnapping was unknown in Britain. But in 1969, the Mafia were thought to be organising in Britain, so it was just possible they had organised a kidnapping. Chief Superintendent Smith suspected time was running out for the kidnapped woman. His fears deepened when the London Evening News splashed the story. He told Alec Mackay he'd made a terrible mistake in going public.
Possibly should never have gone to the press. It's what I thought by getting the press involved and the publicity, it would make her too hot to handle. I said, well, it probably has. It's probably too hot to let her go, really.
Smith had other problems too. He thought it was a genuine kidnapping, but high-ranking officers at Scotland Yard wouldn't believe him.
A lot of the heads of the police said that they're making too much of a fuss about this, you know. It's not, she could have gone and run off with the milkman. Well, she could have, but she was not the type who would run off with the milkman.
Next day was New Year's Eve. A letter arrived addressed to Alec Mackay, postmarked North London. It was in his wife's handwriting. The message was desperate. Alec, darling, I am deteriorating in health and spirit. Please cooperate. Excuse writing, I am blindfolded and cold. I think of you constantly and the family and friends. Have been calm so far, darling. What have I done to deserve such treatment? Can you do something soon? New Year's Day 1970. It was bitterly cold, and Muriel McKay had been missing for 3 days. The police were baffled by her disappearance. Reporters besieged the Mackay's house. The story dominated the news. At 7:45 that evening, M3 rang again. Muriel's daughter, Deanne, took the call.
Hello? Hello?
All right, speak to Dion, please.
Yes, she's speaking.
Look, it's concerning your mum.
Yes?
Are you telling they've gone too far?
Who do I tell's gone too far? I think...
They've gone to the police.
Who's gone too far?
Oh,
We've gone too far in going to the police.
they've got to get £1 million pounds. I'll contact them tomorrow. And they've got to get it to 5 million tenors.
Where do you get £1 million from? I wouldn't know.
Well, I don't know. That's my business.
Well, if you wanted it, it's your business, isn't it?
As before, the caller left no clue to his whereabouts. In 1970, the police did not have today's technology to trace calls. All they had to go on was the caller's accent. Apparently West Indian. After the call on the 1st of January, M3 went quiet. Bill Smith felt the publicity had scared them off. Like other detectives in Britain, he'd never come up against kidnappers. So he sought the opinion of the FBI.
I really thought that's what we were looking for. We were looking for black men who were involved some way with the Mafia. And I think somebody made a phone call to the American Embassy, with the FBI. They got the FBI at the American Embassy. And they said, yeah, they could be black men in the mafia, and but they're more American. They don't speak like that. They're more American.
The FBI's view was that not only were the kidnappers not mafia, they were not even professionals. Only amateurs would demand an impossible sum like £1 million. But whoever had Muriel McKay, her future was grim.
Yes.
The FBI reckoned that if you hadn't got her within 3 or 4 days, she'd gone, she was dead.
Smith now launched the biggest search ever undertaken in Britain for a missing person. On a single day, 18,000 police scoured London, concentrating on Wimbledon Common and Epping Forest, the area from where M3's first call had been made. They found the abandoned bodies of 6 newborn babies, but no trace of Mrs. McKay. Once more, the family took matters into their own hands. Deanne's husband, David Dyer, told reporters that in an attempt to locate Mrs. McKay, they were consulting a medium.
Now, as soon as that was in the newspapers, every soothsayer and a dowser, you talk about they've got it, stargazers, got in touch, they all want to help. Hundreds, not just 1 or 2, hundreds. One from a Maori in New Zealand, of all places.
It wasn't only the family who was speaking to the press. Some of Chief Superintendent Smith's own team was selling information.
I would go to public houses with them, they would give me information, and on occasion money would pass hands, because the information wasn't exactly free. There's an old saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and in journalistic terms, there's no such thing as a free policeman.
They're idiots, really. They're just greedy. They're trying to make... They can ruin a case, completely ruin a case, by just getting a few quid from a reporter.
I had one extraordinary incident. Some information was passed to me by a certain policeman, and we met in an underground lavatory, a public lavatory. We went into the cubicle together, and I'm not really that way inclined, and I passed him £100, and he, in exchange, passed me some documents which I needed for the story I was working on in connection with the McKay case at the time.
Thanks to the press coverage, bogus calls now flooded in from conmen trying to squeeze money from the McKays. Bill Smith's team had to follow each one up. One caller told Deanne to get on a bus with £5,000 and her mother would be released at a pre-arranged signal.
But I couldn't allow this to be done by the family. I couldn't allow this. So we've got to disguise a policeman to look like Diane as best as we could, really. But the old policemen have big feet. I don't know why, but it seems they start at 9.5 and go up. Well, we have one officer who was size 8.
Obviously, I was then clean-shaven, no beard. I was kitted out in a long lady's wig, a lady's coat, and knee-length ladies' boots.
Walter White's less than convincing disguise set the tone for the operation.
They would see a car following, and she would see her mother sat in the passenger seat. And as the bus come to a stop, the car was going to pull up and she had to throw £5,000 out of the bus into the car where the mother would be released there. We followed up. We didn't see any car pull up behind and flashing headlights all the way to Stamford Hill. We went. Nothing occurred at all. Nothing.
Well, that's the sort of thing, and that happened several times, which was a thorn in our side because we didn't believe any of it, but because the McKay family themselves were clinging onto every straw.
The police decided to produce a poster of Mrs. McKay to be distributed around the country.
They wanted a photograph of her not smiling because they wanted to do a poster, you know, have you seen this woman? And I couldn't find a photograph of her not smiling or laughing. I mean, she was that sort of woman. She was always, happy and always smiling. And I found one, which is the one they used eventually, where she was sort of only just smiling.
Bill Smith felt sure the key to the case lay in the telephone caller with the West Indian accent, who had been silent now for a week. He had to be coaxed out. On the 9th of January, Alec Mackay made a television appeal, scripted by Smith.
I just cannot understand why those holding Muriel have not contacted me recently. I appeal to you who contact me by telephone, letter or telegram. My son or sons-in-law are ready to meet you or any intermediary anywhere on my behalf.
Alec Mackay couldn't raise anything like £1 million. He hoped the kidnappers would settle for $25,000, which he arranged to borrow from the bank. The morning after his appeal, the editor of the News of the World received a letter from M3. I am writing these lines to you because I can't get through to Alec Mackay on the phone. It is bugged by the police. When he authorizes the police out of his home and he is free to talk, I shall contact him giving instructions. Next day, several of Alec's friends dropped by. With surprising hospitality, Alec served them drinks. As he did so, an intriguing event took place. Alec's other son-in-law, Ian Burgess, answered a call. He heard a distraught woman say, "She's going to be shot," before what sounded like her being hit. According to his diary, Burgess then heard a shot. The rest of the call was drowned out by the guests. The police paid little attention to it. But until the day he died, Ian Burgess believed he had heard someone being murdered. On the 19th of January, 3 weeks after the kidnap, M3 finally got back in touch. By now, Alec Mackay was desperate.
Hello? This is the M3. We want $1 million?
Well, nobody's got £1 million, and I mean, quite frankly, it's ridiculous to talk about it.
If we sunflower, then we give you a few days and...
Look, you give me 10 years, everyone. You might as well kill me now.
Son, if you don't cooperate...
I'm cooperating, but I can't cooperate with impossible sums. That'd be...
If you don't cooperate within the time we give you in the level we'll be sending, you have to be blamed for not seeing your wife again.
What have I done to deserve this?
Well, I don't know.
My God, I wish you...
Sorry we had to do this because your wife is such a nice person.
She is the quietest and most charitable person you've ever met.
This is my order and that is final. I've got nothing more to say.
But I can't give you what you can't give me. Yes.
Next morning, an envelope arrived, postmarked Wood Green in North London. It contained a ransom note from M3 and a letter written by Muriel addressed to her husband. I am deteriorating in health and spirit. Please cooperate. Excuse writing, I'm blindfolded and cold. Please keep the police out of this and cooperate with the gang, giving the code M3. The earlier you get the money, the quicker I may come home, or you will not see me again. Bill Smith was struck by something in the letters.
Oh, all the letters, I think, were written at one stage. And they're all written about the same time, because one letter came, it was telling us, the last letter that came said, keep the police out of this, and you'll know who these people are, because they'll use the term M3. Now, we've been using the bloody term M3 for weeks, you know, for a long time. So, I mean, she wouldn't have sent that when we already knew they were M3. I mean, that was obviously one of the first ones they should have sent, but they sent her out of order.
Smith was convinced the kidnappers had become killers. Killers who still hoped to make $1 million. Their ransom note gave instructions when and where to pay the money. The Mackays had 10 days to raise the cash, giving Smith 10 days to bait a trap. The ransom drop was to be on the 1st of February. The kidnapper's note told Alec Mackay to take the money to a telephone kiosk in North London, where he would be given further instructions. As proof they had Muriel, M3 sent a package containing pieces of her clothing. Bill Smith thought it was time to prepare Alec Mackay for the worst.
And I said that I think you've got to accept that she's probably, probably never see her again. She probably dead. Can you accept it? And he said, I think I can. He said, but I still hope. I said, well, yes, but hope for the best. And that's the first time I saw him break down, but he broke down. We were in his bedroom, just me and him. And he broke. I put my arms around him. He was sobbing away there. He really was upset.
Smith insisted the operation was too dangerous for Alec Mackay or any other member of his family. Plainclothes detectives went instead. Detective Inspector John Miners retraced the journey.
I decided I would drive the rolls, so I would dress up as a chauffeur. So I had a very dark overcoat, which we decided I would wear, black shoes, and a black peaked cap.
Ian Mackay had told M3 that his father was too ill and he would go instead. So in the back of the car sat another detective pretending to be Ian.
I was a young detective sergeant. I was 25 years old, and if anything, rather than fearful, it was quite exciting to be going out to meet the kidnappers.
The Rolls-Royce was followed by an unmarked police car. Both were fitted with radio tracking equipment. In the boot of the Rolls was a suitcase containing £500,000 in specially forged £5 notes.
All in bundles of 500, and the fivers looked something like this. I know the white strip down the middle is very obvious, but on a pile of 500 with a real one on the top, and this is on good paper, the proper paper, it certainly would, when you just rip through, and we made sure it did, was very, very realistic. They issued me with a 38 police revolver. It was loaded, and I'd have used it.
It was a carefully planned operation, but almost immediately there were problems.
We arrived at the telephone kiosk on the North Circular Road, and I went in as instructed, and was very surprised to find that the phone didn't ring, and we waited and we waited, and eventually on my radio, which I had concealed in a sling as though I'd injured my right arm, I was told that the telephone was in fact ringing and there was a malfunction on the bell, and so we couldn't hear it. So I answered the telephone as though it had just rung, and a voice at the other end, who purported to be one of the kidnappers, told us to go off to another telephone kiosk fairly nearby, where we would receive our instructions.
Their next instructions told them to head out into Hertfordshire. As it grew dark, a second problem emerged. The tracking equipment wasn't up to the job.
I was told by the officers who were responsible for tracking us afterwards that it was absolutely useless. It had a very limited range. I think the tracking vehicle had to be within about 200 yards of us all the time, which, I mean, that's difficult enough for someone who's not operating equipment like that. But for someone who's got to operate equipment like that and stay within 200 yards, it's almost impossible.
Instructions found in the second telephone box told them to look for white flowers by the roadside at the signpost for the village of Dane End. For both police and family, a great deal was at stake.
The main thing on the journey between us, we didn't speak very much. I think the adrenaline was in me and Roger, and we realised it was very important what we were doing. We didn't think about the danger at times, and danger came into it.
Unknown to miners, dozens of unmarked police cars were converging on the area, some carrying officers senior to Bill Smith, who wanted to be in on the action.
Senior officers were arguing over the airwaves about who should take command, what should happen next, who should go where and why. And of course, different squads had their different senior officers, and everybody wanted a bit of the action. The only problem was that people on the ground didn't know what the action was.
The contact I had, in particular about this ransom run, told me that it was one of the biggest farces that he'd heard of, because apparently Roger Street, who was dressed up as Ian Mackay, and John Miners, who was dressed up as a chauffeur, were aware that they were being followed by something like 63 different cars, police cars actually, which were civilian cars. They're also being pursued by 3 Hells Angels on motorbikes who are actually policemen pretending to be Hells Angels.
We went into a roadside cafe with a huge car park, and we parked there. Somebody else parked. All the cars that were parking were police officers. I looked then back down the A10, and all you could see was headlights coming up from the direction of London. And they all finished up, or trying to get into this one car park. And it was a complete and utter chaos.
Finally, Miners and Street found the flowers marking the drop site.
It was very, very dark and quite eerie. I was quite surprised to see a head pop over the hedge and say, it's all right, we're already here. And obviously the backup team, the team that were following us, had got the message over the radio and had managed to find the location and conceal themselves before we'd arrived.
The police noticed a Volvo car pass by several times. Somehow, no one got its number.
I think that if the kidnappers were anywhere in the vicinity that night, the fact that all those cars, all containing police officers, must have really frightened them off.
The suitcase stood untouched. John Miners waited by a telephone box for a call that never came.
And sitting, I think the worst time of all was when we got back to the first telephone box at Church Street, and sitting there waiting for the kidnappers to tell us, to phone us and tell us that they'd taken the money and where Mr. Mackay was.
Sitting in a lay-by near the drop point, Bill Smith watched all the comings and goings around the suitcase. He even saw the mystery Volvo briefly.
The car had just disappeared. It came up the road, went back down the road, and never saw it again, and 2.5 hours later gave instructions for the suitcases to be picked up together with the flowers. And back we go to Arthur Road. I was choked, really upset, because I thought it made too much of this. There's too many people It was too much.
The operation had been a fiasco. If Muriel McKay was still alive, the kidnappers would surely kill her now. The day after the attempt to catch them had ended in farce. The kidnappers, to everyone's surprise, called again. They revealed what the police had feared. They had spotted the trap the night before.
Is that Ian?
Yes, it is.
What a nice boy you are, aren't you? You know who's speaking, aren't you?
Is that the M3?
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you know they were all police?
What? Who were?
There are at least 20 cars. At least 20 cars. Look, the Ford Grey Escort parked just in front of the place where we are. 4 motorbikes, motorcycles with they had red and white helmets. They parked in front of a house there. And I'll let you know whether we'll be able to pursue this or whether they are going for execution. But Ian, I really don't know what to say, boy. Just imagine, the person who brings you into this world, you have condemned that person. Just think of it.
The following day, the 4th of February, was Muriel McKay's birthday, her 56th. M3 did not call. But in the morning, they rang again. The police were astonished the kidnappers had not backed off. They gave precise instructions on how to deliver the ransom.
Today will be tomorrow. Remember, any error will be fatal.
We didn't expect to get another call because, having blown the first one really, and they knew that there were a lot of police were about there, and they knew that their operation was being mucked up. But we got the call to go to take the money in 2 white suitcases to the same Church Street telephone box. This time, Mr. McKay had to drive and take his daughter Diane with him. Now, of course, this was out of the question. It was decided that I should dress up as McKay in a Vicuna coat, one of McKay's Vicuna coats, and his Russian hat, and that Diane should be impersonated by Joe Sandwich, who was a DC on the flying squad. And my wife made me up as McKay.
By now, police had concluded the kidnappers were based in Hertfordshire. They combed the county. Flying squad officers checked every village for Afro-Caribbeans living in the area. In a tiny village called Stocking Pelham, they asked at the pub. Locals said there were no West Indians, but 2 Pakistani brothers lived on a farm outside the village. A report was filed and forgotten. The Rolls-Royce continued on its mission. After calling at telephone boxes at Tottenham and Bethnal Green, Miners and Armitage were told by M3 to take the tube to Epping. Bill Smith could not afford a leak of any kind. A telex went to all newspaper editors, warning them any stories about the operation could cost Mrs. McKay her life.
Got out and waited in the station for a telephone call. And eventually I got the call, and the voice said, "You will now get a taxi and take the money and go to Gates used car garage at Bishop Stortford, where you will put the money on the pavement, we got to Bishop Stortford, found the place, And so we got the cases out of the boot, put them on the pavement.
All around the area, flying squad officers lay hidden in wait. They did not have to wait long. A blue Volvo appeared. It was the same car seen at the previous ransom attempt.
It went down the road slowly, and then, obviously, after a few moments, it must have turned round somewhere and came back up slowly on the opposite side of the road. It slowed down, and whether he was going to get out or not, I don't know, but it slowed down, and then, because of hooting of a vehicle behind, it moved off again.
But the Volvo returned, and Jack Quarry was able to get a better look.
I was able to crawl across, and I saw the back end of the vehicle, and the number plate was there. It was only about 2 yards away from me. And I wrote the number down very quick in large writing.
At last, the police had the number of the mysterious Volvo, but then a local couple spotted the cases.
As we came to garage the car, just over to the left here, I saw 2 light-coloured suitcases on the path. And I thought, as had happened before, somebody had lost their luggage going to Stansted Airport. So I asked my husband to drive me down to the telephone kiosk to ring the police.
After calling the police, the Abbots stood by the cases, guarding them, totally unaware of the effect of their public-spirited action.
Back in the station, and there were a number of Metropolitan Police officers, including Superintendent Smith. And at this time they were becoming increasingly concerned about a local couple. Eventually, I believe the comment was something like, will you tell those couple to fuck off out of it and leave them alone? And as I say, they were very put out, the officers at the police station, about these 2 people.
And I was getting colder and colder, and I'm afraid I said a few things I shouldn't have about the police at that.
Eventually, the Abbots abandoned their vigil and went home, but the kidnappers had already been scared off. The local police took the cases away.
So they're thwarted again, are they? The 2 kidnappers, because the suitcases are now out of my hands and out of their hands and in Hertfordshire local nick. So it blew out again there as far as that was concerned. But what we've got now is the index number of the Volvo car. Now all we have to do now is whip across to County Hall, get the night watchman out and find out who owns this car. And in no time at all, I know it belongs to Mrs. Elsa Hossain. She's the registered owner of Rooks Farm, Stocking Pelham, which is not far from there. And the next morning, in mass, we arrive at Rooks Farm.
The farm was where the flying squad had been told the 2 Pakistani brothers lived. When Bill Smith and his officers knocked, the door was opened by the owner, Arthur Hussain, a tailor, who lived there with his wife Elsa and his younger brother, Nissan. The Hussains were Asian, but they came from Trinidad, and so they had West Indian accents. Police began an inch-by-inch search for Muriel McKay.
I expected to find her, some part of her, but nothing was found of her there, nothing. Anyway, we went through that farm like a fine-tooth comb, really.
There was no trace of Mrs. McKay, but there was evidence enough to link the Hussains to the crime, including a notebook on which kidnap messages had been written. In the Volvo, there was a paper flower similar to the ones taken from the roadside at the first rendezvous. On the envelope, in which pieces of Mrs. McKay's coat were posted to her husband, was a thumbprint. It was Arthur Hussain's.
We were cleverer than they were by getting them to send bits of her clothing, let's be fair. You must have been a bit of an idiot to send clothing, but they wanted the money. The money was on offer, and they had to prove that they had her, that she was alive. They had to prove they had her. They did. They proved they had her. And I proved they had her later on.
No one knows how Mrs. McKay died. Bill Smith thinks the Husseins killed her within 48 hours and buried her body.
At that time, North Sea gas was coming into the area. And what an ideal place to have put a person next to a pipe that's been covered it up with some of the gravel, and the next day it carries on again.
There was another mystery surrounding the case. A piece of evidence that might have been crucial to the investigation went missing.
I understand that Muriel McKay's daughter states that she found a photograph in 20 Arthur Road that was within the first 24 hours of the incident happening, which showed a number of Asian males with a vehicle in the background. She thought she should hand this to the police, which she said she did. I never received this photograph. It did not come into my possession. If it had come into my possession, we could have changed direction. We could have gone away from Afro-Caribbean and started to look